Welcome to Advocacy and Politics Unplugged, the show that will dissect critical policy issues, explore the art of advocacy and politics, and share insights on how to make your voice heard in today's ever-changing political landscape. I'm your host, John Ravitz, the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Business Council of Westchester. This is our first show in 2025, and as we are the county's largest business membership organization that focuses on economic development and advocacy, the purpose of this show is to really give our listeners an opportunity to hear from people who are on the ground really doing the work of advocacy on a daily basis. And we're so pleased this afternoon to have Ashley Ranslow, who is the New York State Director for the National Federation of Independent Businesses, NFIB, as our guest today. Let me tell you a little bit about Ashley. As I said, she is the New York State Director for the NFIB, which is New York's leading small business advocacy organization, representing more than 11,000 small independent businesses statewide. She's responsible for the legislative and political affairs of the New York office, lobbying members of the New York State Senate and Assembly, the Office of the Governor, and various state agencies to promote the interest of NFIB and the small business community. Ashley graduated magna cum laude from Syracuse University in 2010 with a bachelor's degree of arts in political science and psychology, and she currently serves as the chair of the Empire State Society of Association Executives. Ashley, thanks for joining us today, and thank you for being our first guest in 2025.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit about how you ended up being the New York State Director for NFIB.
You know, I have to go way back to my original roots, which is that I was born and raised in the state of New Hampshire. And anyone who's sort of a political junkie knows that New Hampshire is the spot, right, where you have the first primary in the nation. So even from a very young age, I was exposed to politics. It was all around us. Our family would go out to breakfast on a Sunday morning during a presidential election year, and you would see candidates walk in, shaking hands, talking to you. It was all normal. And so I just grew up in that atmosphere. So when I went to college, I knew that I wanted to do something in government, in political science. And so fast forward, I went to Syracuse, studied political science, loved it. And right out of college, I just got into lobbying. I worked for a couple of private lobbying firms. And then I said, you know what? I don't know that I love the clients. Let's get into some advocacy for a group. And business is where I landed, and now small business. And I just love it. To talk about small businesses and to talk about New York's business environment and community, you know, it could be tough, but at the same time, it's so rewarding when you have these conversations with small business owners. So I love what I do, and I feel blessed to be doing it every day.
Well, we're just glad that you are sitting in that position because the Business Council of Westchester works very closely in so many different projects with NFIB under your leadership. So you mentioned small businesses, and we always talk about small businesses as being the backbone for the state's economy. But you really have to listen to what small businesses are saying. Owners are saying the challenges that they're facing on a daily basis. You know, as many of them survived the pandemic and now are trying to continue to move forward. What are some of the things that you're hearing from your members across the state, whether it's upstate or downstate, that you're really going to understand now that you need to focus on in this Albany session that started today?
Great question. And it all boils down to cost. That's the number one thing I hear about is the cost of doing business. And you can kind of organize it into the buckets, but it all comes down to cost. Some small businesses are still struggling with inflation. Some are still dealing with labor shortage, which translates into higher wages, right, that they're having to pay, and the accompanying cost of those payroll taxes. For some, it's the cost of their utility bills. It's the cost of their health insurance. It's the cost of their property and casualty or other types of insurance. Frequently, when I get phone calls from small business owners, it's because they're having a really hard time just getting by. I had one small business owner in the Hudson Valley a couple of months ago said, you know, I started my small business 15 years ago. And when I started, I made a good living. I wasn't rich, but I made a good living. And now I'm just making enough money to barely get by. And that's where it really just does, again, boil down to cost. And that's the number one thing I hear over and over. It might be a very specific cost, but in general, it's the cost of doing business in New York.
And I guess that's really, and you and I have had this conversation in the past. That's really where the disconnect seems still to be. When we're talking about the legislature in Albany, we're talking about members who represent districts that have businesses that are dealing with the challenges that you're just facing now. So when you look at moving forward now, going into the 2025 Albany session, what are some of the key issues that you're going to be continuing to drill down on?
There are a lot of issues, and it's hard to drill down on a few, but there are some top priorities that we have. And it all goes back to this buzzword of the year that everyone's talking about, which is affordability. Everyone is talking about affordability. But what our priorities are is to really get at affordability. If you want to make things more affordable for New Yorkers, for consumers, for everyday people, you have to address the underlying costs. And there are significant underlying costs in New York. We are our own worst enemy in some cases. And I'll give a couple examples. So for one, unemployment insurance. The state is $6 billion in debt. This is leading to the highest possible state UI taxes. It's leading to interest assessment surcharges. It's leading to increased federal UI taxes. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of extra dollars per employee that businesses are having to pay out. New York businesses are having to pay out for our unique problem. So this is something that the legislature can and the governor can deal with. They can address the UI debt, get rid of it, and bring down those UI costs. And again, that's not something that businesses are having to pass along to consumers, right, to make up for. So UI is a top issue
and
for
just
us.
Staying with UI for a second, because I think one of the things that I know you've talked to legislators about, and I have, is we're not talking about major corporations. Yes, they have to deal with unemployment insurance. We're talking about small businesses, non-for-profits, who are getting the same type of financial hit now at every pay cycle because of the UI issue that you've just raised.
Exactly. And you brought up not-for-profits. They're impacted by this. Small businesses are impacted by this. And it doesn't sound like a lot, when it's like, oh, it's an extra $400 per employee on average. It doesn't sound like a lot, but when you add that up across all of your employees and you add that up across the last 4 years, you're talking significant money at that point, money that you could have poured back into your business or poured back into your nonprofit that is tied up. And again, unnecessarily tied up from the COVID and from the pandemic that we should have dealt with 4 years ago, but we didn't.
And other states did.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
So as you continue to talk to legislators about UI, when you give them real practical examples, I mean, again, we don't have to name specific legislators because we both talk to them. I sometimes get frustrated because I get this blank stare across the table from me, in which they must understand that this is happening to their shops, their store owners in Main Street of their districts, and they see a path to fix it, but yet there seems to be just some sort of disconnect on why they don't.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it comes down to money, right? It takes money to fix this problem. And unfortunately, in the priority ranking of how the state wants to spend money, this is not where they, quote, want to spend it. But again, if you want to address affordability and you want to address how much it costs when I go to the convenience store or the grocery store or to the pizza parlor to buy my Friday night pizza or to buy my eggs or whatever it is, I'm paying more for that good because of these unnecessary costs we're passing along to businesses. And that's, I think, where we have to really drill down on this.
This is John Ravitz, the Executive Vice President of the Business Council of Westchester. You're listening to our Advocacy and Politics Unplugged, part of the BCW Podcast Network. Our guest for this episode is Ashley Ranslow, who is the New York State Director for the National Federation of Independent Businesses. All right, so UI obviously is a top one. What are some of the others that you are really going to, again, be addressing with the legislature?
Another one is this absurd issue about weekly pay and manual workers. There is this over 100-year law on the books that requires businesses to pay manual workers on a weekly basis. In a 2019 court case ruled that if you violate this law, this 100-year-old law, then you are potentially subject to a private right of action, liquidated damages, interest on judgment, attorney's fees, and a 6-year statute of limitations. So when you add all this up, we're looking at multi-million-dollar lawsuits against businesses, large and small, for the fact that they paid workers every 2 weeks instead of every week.
Right.
It's insanity what's going on. This 2019 court case has just run amok, and we're trying to fix this in the legislative arena because the courts just move so slowly. NFIB and other groups have challenged this decision. It's making its way through the courts, but it's been this happened in 2019 and we've challenged it. It's 2025, right? It's been 6 years of cases. And so the legislative route is the way to go. We proposed a fix. The governor had it in her budget last year. We felt good about it. It fell out of the budget in last minute budget negotiations, but we're taking another run at it this year because this is also, again, you have businesses that are on the hook in these multi-million-dollar lawsuits. If you're a small business, number one, good luck surviving that because you probably won't. And if you do, it's because you're forced into settlement talks and have to pay a significant amount. But again, that all translates into costs. And we are self-imposing, our own worst enemy, allowing this to happen, allowing businesses to accrue these multi-million-dollar lawsuits, and then turning around and wondering why things cost so much.
And when you describe this situation, which I guess for insider baseball people, we were using the phrase pay frequency, but this is an issue because of this court case in which businesses have done the right thing. They've paid their employees. It's not like they withheld pay. They paid their employees every 2 weeks. At no point did their employees raise their hand and say, excuse me, shouldn't I be getting paid once a week? And now, because of this law case, employees can go back and say, well, even though I did get paid every 2 weeks for X amount of years, I'm now due these punitive damages and financial cost because of this court decision. And I know you have talked to businesses and given the legislature some real specific examples. And maybe you can just share with us one or two without naming the business, but just again, the size of the businesses and what the cost was that they had to face.
Yeah, so we have a couple of businesses, particularly, this really impacts mostly the downstate region, which should probably concern some of your listeners, John. But we have a couple of members in Manhattan and Queens. One is a interior design and architecture type business. They got hit with one of these lawsuits because their employees, while they don't swing a hammer necessarily, they do go out and do site visits, right? And so they're alleged to be manual workers and to be paid weekly. And they are looking at a $5+ million lawsuit. But then you have, I have another business that is a small IT firm. And again, these IT workers, the attorneys in this case are alleging that because they walk around carrying laptops, because sometimes they have to get up on a ladder to access a server, that they're manual workers and should have been paid weekly. This business has 100 employees. And so they're looking at a $10 million plus a lawsuit. So it is. These are not necessarily your sort of traditional businesses you think about, but they're important, and they're small businesses and they're local business and independently owned businesses, and they're getting hit with these multi-million-dollar lawsuits. And the thing people sometimes forget is, particularly with small businesses, they don't have legal teams on retainer. They don't have attorneys that are just working for them. So unfortunately, for small businesses, they really feel the brunt of this and are really pushed into settlement talks because they have no other choice. They can't afford to fight it.
And before we move on to another issue, I think one of the things that, again, has been so interesting is that there's really no definition of what constitutes a manual laborer in this situation. Yeah. And you just gave the example of the IT company. So, again, it's just New York State not seeing the big picture and the unintended consequences of some of these things.
And understanding that they're in the position to fix it and address it quite easily with a number of different solutions and potential solutions that have been offered, right? So again, to get back to this sort of affordability argument, we have to address the root cause of what's driving some of these costs up. And I think, you, the Business Council of Westchester, NFIB, we're trying to do that through policy.
Another area that, again, raises the cost, and we just continue to see the legislature continue to write more legislation on this issue, is workers' comp. And again, no one wants to do anything to hurt an employee who has been hurt on the job. But the bills that continue to come out of the Senate and the Assembly, again, are not based on reality of what business owners are dealing with on a daily basis. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the issues in that arena that you've been dealing with, and again, what the impact has been?
Yes, absolutely. We keep seeing workers' comp bills come up year after year. And it really roots back to 2017. There was a compromise between then, at the time, Governor Cuomo, the labor community, the business community, to do a number of workers' compensation reforms, because workers' compensation was, at the time, something that businesses identified as one of their highest cost issues. And so that came together. We did some reforms to try to mitigate some costs and bring costs down to some level, not low enough, right, for most businesses, but to bring it down. So we agreed to all these 2017 reforms. And what we've now seen over the last couple of years is a rollback, and even beyond a rollback, just an all-out expansion of what the types of benefits people qualify for, the amount of benefits in terms of their price tag. And all of this translates into higher workers' comp premiums for employers. And again, you have that impact. If I am an employer or small business owner and paying more in my workers' compensation premium, I have to raise my prices, or I have to cut back hours, or not hire somebody, right? And you're impeding that growth. You're impeding that ability to drive down or bring down prices. And some of these bills, I mean, the one that we dealt with this past year was on extraordinary mental stress coverage, but it was so poorly defined. Anybody could have alleged mental stress on the job and filed the workers' comp claim. So it's things like that we are battling and trying to get through. And
for our listeners, the governor did sign that into law at the end of 2024, which again is going to have a direct impact on employees. As crazy as it sounds, we only have a few moments left. I want to ask you again, as you sit in this role and as you have to deal with the issues that we've been discussing this afternoon, what are some of the advocacy tools that work for you that you think really can get the attention, but also really get to the passion of what your members are feeling?
There is nothing more powerful than a business owner going directly to their lawmaker. And I can't stress that enough with my own members, with any business owner I talk to, no matter who you are, where you are, reaching out to your elected official, asking them for a meeting, whether it's, a phone meeting, virtual meeting, and talking to them about their issues. It's great to have advocacy organizations. We serve an incredibly important role. But sometimes lawmakers are the most moved by an actual business owner in their district's story. So that's the greatest advocacy tool, is leveraging the members that we have. So that pay frequency, that weekly pay lawsuit issue I referenced, I had many successful meetings in the last couple of months because I took two members that were named in lawsuits and we met with those lawmakers. And it opened their eyes to talk to the business owner and understand the impact the business owner was feeling by that. They began to realize that there was more to this issue than they knew, or hadn't heard of it at all. But until we brought it to them with this business owner. So that's the most important, is that just to take a few minutes out of your day and reach out to your lawmakers.
Another thing that you have done really successfully, because we've been part of that, is you've helped build coalitions around the state of business organizations, trade associations, to really be able to have one voice to be on certain issues. Can you give us an example of that? And again, the power of that type of, long list of organizations that lawmakers now see are united.
Yes, there's also a lot of power, right? The squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? But the louder you make the wheel, the better. So, and that's often done by, as you said, coalition building. And a great example of that this past session, there was a bill to try to regulate workplace temperatures, right? Heat or cold. This bill got a ton of momentum at the end of session, would have been devastating for a bunch of industries. And so we built a coalition. You were on it, NFIB was on it, restaurants, Farm Bureau, anybody you could imagine, all sorts of trade industries jumped on this letter. We had over 40 groups on it, and that helped make the difference to stop this bill from passing at the end of session. Lawmakers all of a sudden had this letter in their hand with 40 plus logos and said, okay, I see that there's a lot of opposition to it. Maybe I don't support this.
And realizing it is an issue that's just not affecting their backyard, but it's affecting regions across the state.
Yes.
I can't encourage businesses enough to, if they want to have that eyes, ears, and voice for it to help them to join the NFIB. Can you give our listeners just a website address so that people can go to the website?
Yes, great. At www.nfib.com. And if you want to find out the latest on what's going on in New York, you can do www.nfib.com/New York. And
I know the NFIB also does work in Washington on federal issues as well.
Yes. And our top federal issue right now is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. A number of those provisions are coming up for expiration this year, and preserving the small business 20% deduction is our top priority in DC.
Well, Ashley, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Again, the Business Council of Westchester is so proud to be working with NFIB on so many of the issues that we discussed today. We didn't get to the changing energy landscape and some of the other things that we are going to be tackling, but it is important for folks to understand that there are organizations like NFIB that really will go to the mat for you, that will roll up their sleeves, do the work, and make sure that your issues are heard by the legislators who will and can make a difference. So Ashley, thank you for joining us this afternoon, and I'm sure I'll see you in the halls at Albany real soon.
Yes, see you soon, John. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Be sure to check out the BCW Podcast Network's expansive lineup of shows: Leadership Unleashed, What's Trending, the Member Spotlight, WIN, the Innovation Roundtable, and Advocacy and Politics Unplugged. Stay tuned to our next episode of Advocacy and Politics Unplugged, premiering next month. The Business Council of Westchester is the county's largest business membership organization focusing on economic development and advocacy. With over 1,100 members, it is our mission to work for the profitability of our members and prosperity for the Westchester community. To learn more about the Business Council of Westchester, please go to www.thebcw.org.
The BCW Podcast Network. Build, connect,